had a bit of a reality check about a week or so ago. I challenged my two youngest children, Mariah and Judah, to a race back to our vehicle. And like a good dad, I gave them a bit of a head start. But I did so because I knew that I was going to take a shortcut. And my shortcut included jumping over a short fence. Or what I considered a short fence. I thought I could simply do a little scissor kick like I used to do back in my days of high jump. And I realized that short fence was not so short. And my shortcut did not work out as planned. The reality check was I am not the same as my 18-year-old self. Right? The reality is I've aged a little. We'll put it that way. And maybe you've had your own reality check at one time or another. See, a reality check is an occasion on which one is reminded of the state of things in the real world. The state of things in the real world. Perhaps you're imagining this morning, maybe you're dreaming about that brand new mountain bike, right? With full suspension. I know of at least one or two people that are dreaming of a brand new mountain bike, right? And they can close their eyes and they can almost imagine themselves on that bike and trekking through the trails. Or maybe it's a brand new car, or who knows what it is that you're thinking or dreaming about. But then you take a look at your bank account, right? And the real world comes crashing in. It's a reality check. Or a reality check might be described this way: something that clarifies or serves as a reminder of reality, often by correcting a misconception. I mean, that's kind of like the reality check that I had. It was a misconception. I am no longer the same as my 18-year-old self. In the text we read this morning, James, who's writing to Christians who are scattered throughout the nations, Christians who had faced persecution in Jerusalem, have been spending years scattered about the nations, is giving them a bit of a reality check. And in the middle of this text, he asks a reality-shaking question. What is your life? What is your life? And it's not what is life, but he makes it deeply personal. What is your life? And just like those reading this letter for the first time, who had to face certain realities that James shared within this text, I want us to consider this question this morning. What is your life? I want us to consider some of the realities that James brings forth in this text that we read this morning. This earth-shaking reality, this earth-shaking question: what is your life? And there's only one individual that can answer that question, and that's you. See, and the first reality that James brings to our attention is that we do not know or control the future. We do not know or control the future. James had ministered within the church, the early church, for I believe it was close to 30 to 35 years. And when he first began ministering to that church, those Christians were struggling. But it appears by the text that we're reading this morning that some of those Christians began to be quite successful. They began to do well. Many believe that James at this point is writing to businessmen or women within the church, business leaders within the church. But I don't want us to think that this is only written for those that do business or run business. This is for each of us this morning. Because I believe all of us can do exactly what those who are running businesses were doing in the text that we read this morning. The very first thing James points out, the very first problem he points out, is the fact that they were making presumptions. They were making presumptions and they were filled with pride. Why? You do not even know what will happen tomorrow, says James. And he begins by pointing out what's happening within the church. He's saying you're gathering, or you're taking your business and you're looking at your plans for this year, and you're planning to go here and to diversify there, and you're gonna sell, and you're gonna make a profit. You're gonna spend time over here for a year in a new area, right, where there's gonna be new clientele. And you can see the people sort of maybe rubbing their hands together. Oh my goodness, we're gonna make so much profit in that area. Just look at the population. If we just get 10% of those people buying into our product, I don't know, cup holders for camels or something, right? We're going to make good income here. Right? And how many of us quickly do that? We can so easily make plans and begin to believe that we ultimately can fulfill all those plans. See, there's nothing wrong with planning. There's nothing wrong in business with planning to make a profit, but there's something wrong about planning without God's presence. There's something wrong with being presumptuous in the sense that we suppose that those outcomes are based only on what we do ourselves. And there's something wrong with making plans and being full of arrogance and pride, like James points out a little bit later on in the text. Reality. We do not know or control the future. 2020 has been a reality check, amen? Has it not been a bit of an eye-opener? I mean, some of us, it's been a reality check and we've been maybe slightly inconvenienced. Right? I had to change my vacation plans for the summer. That's not really that huge on the grand scheme of things. But it's a small picture of what actually happens. We can make plans, but we quickly realize we're not ultimately in control. Some of you have had to make significant changes in your lives and in how you do business. Some of you have had to adapt very quickly with changes that were coming at you almost daily. Some of you had to adapt with working with a particular amount of staff and all of a sudden having that staff cut in half or in a quarter. Right? It's just a reminder that we do not know or control the future. The other reality that James brings to our attention he says, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? And he says, you are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. The other day, Judah stepped outside. It was a cooler morning, and he blew his, and he's, I'm smoking. No, that's a mist. All right, that mist, it's there, and then it disappears. Or like this picture, I'm not sure if you can see it clearly. A few days ago, there was this mist all over Sturgeon Lake, and it was there for a while. Right as the hot, the cold air comes over a hot body of water, that mist appears until it dissipates after a couple hours. Life is short. It's here today and gone tomorrow. And no one knows this reality that life is a mist more than those who have suffered tragedy. No one knows this truth more than those who have had, a classmate that didn't come to class the next day. Or an employee not come into work the next morning, or a loved one who suffers a heart attack, or is taken quickly and in a moment. But that's not the only truth that life is a mist. See, life is a mist because whether you ask any 75 and up, ask a 75-year-old how quickly life goes by. How quickly life goes by. Well, sorry, I'm not looking at any 75-year-olds. It goes by quick. This past week I had a chance to celebrate the life of my aunt that passed away in 75 years, and you look at all that happened, but really it happened so quickly. It's a mist. It's here today and gone tomorrow. I think it's interesting that James chose mist as his illustration. And what I'm going to share with you, I can't say 100% that this is what James was intending. He could have used anything, something that's here today and gone tomorrow, but he chose to use mist. And what I find interesting about this is what I'm going to share. It might not be what James intended, but it certainly is a biblical truth. What is mist? What is mist? What is that mist that appears over the water, right? It's invisible water droplets. There's a word we've become familiar with lately. Water droplets that we can now see. And when those water droplets disappear, it's not that they cease to exist. What's happened? It's changed state. And if our life is a mist, then when I take my last breath, am I finished? Or do I simply change state? Do I become a different state? I'm no longer physically present, but my state has changed. My condition has changed. I want to share an illustration with you. It's not my illustration. It's one that Francis Chan, an author, a pastor, a well-known speaker, shared. But I'm going to modify it a little bit, but I want to give credit where credit is due. So I want you to imagine with me this morning, I brought some rope. I want you to imagine that this rope is everlasting. It doesn't end. It goes out the church door, goes down Angeline Street, and then wraps around the world to infinity. It is the rope that never ends. Okay, you got the picture? This is eternity. This rope symbolizes eternity. It goes on for millions and millions and millions of years. And I want you to imagine that this rope is the timeline of your life. And this gray part right here, that's the mist. That's the mist. That's the time that you've been given to live physically here on this earth. Right? And right this part right, where is it? Right here? That's where you get your driver's license. Isn't that that's a great part of your life, isn't it? But so many of us live for the mist, and we fail to remember that there's all of this, millions and millions and millions of years. And it's interesting because we look at it and we say, see this part right here? Right there? That's where I'm going to work really, really hard. And that way I can enjoy that part right there. Right? And we think, how much do I need to just live comfortably right here and enjoy my retirement life? And this is what we've been given, and there's eternity, I'll say somewhere else. But for those of us who are in Christ, that eternity is spent on the new earth. As James brings this reality to us, this life that's just a mist, my question for you is this morning, are you living in response to the eternity that we've been given through Jesus Christ? Or are we living simply for the mist? Are you living for the mist, or are you living your life in response to the millions and millions and millions? It's hard to wrap your mind around this millions and millions, eternity that God has given us to those who have accepted Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. And James hits us with that reality this morning. And he hits us with another reality. God knows what will happen tomorrow. God knows the future. Not only does God know, but God has a plan. Right? In the church, we call that sovereignty and providence. James writes, instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. See, James is correcting what the people earlier in the text were doing. They were making plans, but God was not part of their plans. And James is saying, you got to make God part of your plans. I remember growing up in church, Grace Church in Chatham, Ontario, and in the bulletin, there'd be announcements. And after the announcements, there'd be the initials DV. DV. And I never really knew what that meant, but my brother and I would always say, that means the Lord willing. Right? That's my best Dutch accent. Right? And I began to actually believe that's what it stood for. But it means Deo volenta, which means God willing. If God wills, then it will happen. See, we might make plans, and farmers know this so well, right? They might prepare the land, they might plant the seed, they might go through all the work to produce a harvest. But in the end, it's God who provides for the growth. It's God that provides either the sun, it's God that provides the rain, and we can make all the plans that we'd like, but if it's not God's will, then none of them will come to be. Another time, I usually don't speak ill of other pastors, so forgive me in just this one instance, but I was visiting a church, and the pastor obviously took this DV, Deo volenta, to heart. And quite literally, after everything he said, it was the Lord willing. We're going to take up the offering in a moment, the Lord willing. We're going to turn to our hymn books and sing, Great is Thy Faithfulness, the Lord willing. After the service, we're going to have coffee, the Lord willing. And I began looking at the rafters, thinking, is this place going to cave in? Is there something he knows that we don't know? Because he's fairly certain this might be it. Right. And that's sometimes how we go about our plans. We make plans, we make our plans, we strategize, and I'm even talking within the church, and then we say, the Lord willing. Which is almost like saying, now, Lord, please bless our ideas that we came up with on our own. But to take the Lord willing to heart is to actually plan and to seek God's will as we make those plans. To seek out God's plans as we begin to strategize. And I know business owners that do this. They consider what they're planning and the impact that their plans will have on other people, the people they work with, the environment. They take this to heart. And they consider, what is God calling me to do as the leader of this corporation? Or what is God calling us as leaders of the church to do? Where is God leading and directing us? See, the Lord willing is not just a tagline that we attach to the end of our plans, but the Lord willing should be at the beginning of our plans. God, what are you calling us to do? And James points out that God has actually planned those good things in advance for us to do. Sounds similar to what Paul wrote. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. It is sin for them. James is saying, if you know what God is calling you to do, and yet you fail to do it, that is sin. If you know what you are called to do, but you're not willing to fit it into this section, into the mist, that is sin to you, says God, says James. But how many of us live for the mist and not for eternity? How many things has God got planned for us in this small, misty part of our lives? Good things. great opportunities that we can do in response to this gift of eternity that God has given to us. See, God knows what will happen tomorrow. We're all abundantly aware that we're not ultimately in control. Certainly we've experienced that reality check. So what good things might be God calling you to do in the future? Are we going to live in response to the eternity we've been given, or are we going to continue to live and strive just for building our kingdom up in the mist? And with any reality check, in order for it to be a true reality check, we have to do some transforming. We have to consider these realities that James has put forth before us this morning. So I wonder if I could encourage you to consider these three questions that I've got up on the screen this morning. And you can consider them on your own at home, or maybe around the lunch table this afternoon. You can even share it with your family. And if you're worried about forgetting them, you can even take out your camera right now and just take a picture of the slide if that will help. You have freedom to take out your cell phone. We don't know or control the future. So my question is, who is the Lord of your life? Who is the Lord of your life? And it's easy for us to say, well, that's an easy question, Pastor Ben, but then how are you living? How are you living as though the Lord, that Christ is actually the Lord of your life? How many of us are actually living as though we are the Lord of our lives? We are in control as what happens within the mist. We are the ones that are going to make decisions. It's my life. How are you living as though Christ is the Lord of your life? We are like a mist, James reminded us this morning. Are you living for the mist or eternity? Again, the bigger question is how. How are you living for eternity? How are you living in response to what God has given you, eternity? Or how are you living today for the mist? God knows what will happen. God knows the future. Nothing that happens within the mist is a surprise to God. That's either a great comfort to you, or maybe it's slightly terrifying. But there is nothing that happens within the mist, within our lives, that's a surprise to God. Are you seeking God's will in your life? And then the second part of that question, okay, how? How are you living right now? How are you listening to God so that you're hearing His plans, the good that He has prepared for you to do? How are you doing that? Reality checks, they bring us back to reality. But I believe this reality check that James is giving us actually brings a fullness in our life that we would find nowhere else.